All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us during the Lytham Partners Spring 2023 Investor Conference. My name is Robert Blum, Managing Partner of Lytham Partners. During this webcast, we welcome Cadrenal Therapeutics, ticker symbol of CVKD on the NASDAQ, and their CEO, Quang Pham. Today, I've asked Quang to run through the company's slide presentation, and if time permits, we'll engage in a short question and answer session. Before I do turn it over to Quang, I want to remind everyone that management is available for one-on-one meetings later today. If you have not already signed up, please send me an email, and that's Blum, B-L-U-M, at lythampartners.com, or you can visit our website, lythampartners.com/virtual. Click on the one-on-one meeting request button, and we'll look to get you taken care of. So with that, let me turn the floor over to Quang to walk through the presentation. Quang, please proceed.
Well, thank you, Robert and Lytham Partners, for having us as part of your conference this year, and welcome. I am Quang Pham, founder and CEO of Cadrenal Therapeutics. I am going to walk through our corporate deck, and certainly will welcome questions at the end. Here are forward-looking statements for your reference, then I'll get right into it. We will review our tecarfarin opportunity and also some key milestones and exciting clinical data. Cadrenal is developing tecarfarin, a late-stage novel cardiovascular therapy for the prevention of systemic thromboembolism, or more simply known as blood clots of cardiac origins, in patients who have end-stage renal disease and atrial fibrillation, or AFib. The FDA has indicated that only one phase 3 trial will be required before we can submit our new drug application, or NDA, for approval, which we believe provides a unique investment opportunity. This is due in part to the fact that tecarfarin has received an orphan drug designation for its first indication. In addition, the program also has a fast-track designation. Based on our estimated orphan drug pricing, tecarfarin is projected to be an annual revenue opportunity in the U.S. in excess of $1 billion. It is rare for a late-stage cardiovascular drug to have orphan and fast-track designations, and I will review a recent example shortly. For those who are not familiar, Cadrenal acquired the rights to tecarfarin last year. When the previous owners of tecarfarin were originally developing their regulatory strategy, they were looking for a broad label anticoagulation approval. Basically, they were looking for tecarfarin to replace warfarin. Each year, about 2 to 3 million people need to take oral anticoagulants such as warfarin, Eliquis, Xarelto, and Pradaxa to prevent blood clots due to AFib. So we should think of this group as number one, group one, or the broad label group. For most of these patients with normal kidney function, the drugs I just mentioned are effective. The previous owners of tecarfarin conducted 11 human clinical trials in over 1,000 patients. A few key items stood out. First, tecarfarin was well tolerated in healthy adult patients. And secondly, but more importantly, tecarfarin's pharmacokinetics were not affected by chronic kidney disease. So while renal dysfunction had a severe impact on warfarin's metabolism, tecarfarin was not affected in these trials and therefore could be efficacious for the population of patients with severe chronic kidney disease and AFib. In 2019, we took this data to the FDA, which recognized that despite a very high risk of thromboembolic events in this population, there was no current standard of care for most patients with ESRD and AFib where they were not receiving any anticoagulation. On the FDA's recommendation, we applied for and received an orphan drug designation for this indication. Orphan drug designation provides many key benefits, including 7 years of market exclusivity in the US from the date of approval. Then fast forward into January 23, a few months ago, the FDA granted us fast track designation, thus providing us with a number of additional regulatory advantages. The problem, simply put, there are no effective anticoagulant treatments for patients suffering from end-stage renal disease and AFib. This is why we receive our orphan drug designation. And this is why we are so excited about getting tecarfarin to market and start saving lives in this patient group. Moving on to slide 7. Why is this subgroup of patients in such critical need of treatment? The risk of stroke for patients with AFib is 5 times greater than healthy individual. 5 times. The risk of stroke is even greater with worsening renal function. As GFR reduces, or more simply, as renal function deteriorates, the risk of stroke increases. And for individuals that have both AFib and chronic kidney disease, the anticipated stroke rate is more than double than AFib alone. This is a very sick and high-risk patient group. Antithrombotic therapy is typically recommended to decrease the risk of stroke in AFib patients. On slide 8, I would like to stress that antithrombotic therapy is the standard of care to decrease this risk of stroke in AFib patients. If a patient who is suffering from AFib and has normal kidney function, warfarin and other anticoagulation drugs work for reducing stroke risk. However, this is not the case if the patient also has end-stage renal disease, hence the unmet medical need. Warfarin, most common treatment, is difficult to control in ESRD patients due to metabolism via the cytochrome P450 pathway. Tecarfarin was designed to be metabolized differently and reduces the traffic jam of drugs taken concomitantly being metabolized through the liver via cytochrome P450 pathway. Tecarfarin is metabolized via a high-capacity esterase pathway that does not metabolize many other drugs. For this reason, the pharmacokinetics of tecarfarin are very stable, even in subjects with ESRD. This was documented in a comparative study in patients with normal kidney function and with stage 4 kidney failure. Despite the significantly increased risk of stroke in ESRD with AFib patients, most are not given warfarin due to the lack of evidence of benefit. Furthermore, most patients with ESRD and AFib are not prescribed any anticoagulation to reduce their risk of getting a stroke. We have a solution to this problem, and it's tecarfarin. Tecarfarin targets a different metabolic pathway than the most commonly prescribed drugs for the treatment of blood clots and AFib. Tecarfarin has already demonstrated efficacy in anticoagulation, as tecarfarin has demonstrated that TTR, time in therapeutic range, was 72%, was greater than 72% versus an anticoagulation control threshold of 70%. Tecarfarin has been evaluated in 11 human clinical trials in over 1,000 patients. Over $90 million has been invested in getting tecarfarin through these clinical trials and related regulatory work. Tecarfarin has been well tolerated. This means that patients benefited from anticoagulation, however, and they did not experience excessive bleeding. Lastly, tecarfarin is reversible with fresh frozen plasma. Tecarfarin-treated subjects experience fewer major hemorrhages than the warfarin-treated patients. This improved safety profile of tecarfarin is due to metabolic clearance not hindered by the body by eliminating or minimizing its metabolism in the liver, thus avoiding the cytochrome P450 pathway. Tecarfarin was effective as warfarin in patients with normal renal function. I want to stress that the efficacy of anticoagulation has been demonstrated with a time in therapeutic range of 72.3% for tecarfarin. These data charts demonstrate that patients suffering from renal disease struggle to metabolize warfarin, thus creating an unsafe profile with excessive bleeding. This is a comparative study I had mentioned earlier, revealing that renal failure had a significant impact on the PK of warfarin, while the PK of tecarfarin was not altered. Here's our management team. I have been in pharma since 1995 and have been an entrepreneur and CEO since 2000. Cadrenal is my third company. I joined the industry in 1995 after serving as an assault helicopter pilot in the U.S. Marine Corps. Dr. Doug Lasordo is our Chief Medical Officer and a cardiologist who has been on public company management teams. My CFO and co-founder, Matt Zott, is a highly experienced public company CFO who has spent most of his career in life science. Matt and I worked together 15 years ago, and we are happy that we're joining forces again. Doctors Sean Picorni and Chris Granger both worked on the Eliquis Bristol-Myers Squibb trials, including the abandoned renal AF trial with Eliquis versus warfarin for patients with end-stage renal disease and AFib. Dr. Granger was also the primary investigator on the Eliquis versus warfarin for AFib patients pivotal trial with 21,000 enrolled patients. That trial was called the Aristotle trial. Our planned phase 3 trial that's remaining. I want to stress that we like our odds given the historical data and the fact that this trial that's remaining will be against placebo. Patients with ESRD and AFib will be randomized to tecarfarin or placebo. 492 patients at sites in the US, Canada, and the rest of the world to be determined. There will be a 12-month follow-up with the primary endpoint being time to stroke or systemic embolism. Moving to slide 21, there are approximately 150,000 patients suffering annually from end-stage renal disease and AFib concomitantly. Assuming tecarfarin is prescribed for 1/3 market penetration in the US, this could be a $1 billion annual revenue opportunity, assuming pricing at $65 a day or $23,400 a year. Please keep in mind that these projections only assume stage 5, which is end-stage renal disease. The potential for prescribing to patients in advanced stage kidney disease, such as stage 4, about 700,000 patients, is a dramatic larger population. DaVita and Fresenius are the two largest dialysis service providers. These companies alone cover 70% of the addressable patient population. So as we work on awareness and commercialization efforts and assessing the patients and the physicians who currently treat them, both are very concentrated and well-known, which should facilitate the awareness campaign and the eventual commercialization efforts. Tafamidis, as I had mentioned earlier, here is an example of a late-stage cardiovascular drug with orphan and fast-track designations like tecarfarin. At Cadrenal, we have a very clean and a simple balance sheet. We have $4 million in cash and no debt. Our cap table is very clean and also simple. We have 11.7 million shares of common outstanding and no preferred stock, nor do we have any investor warrants. The common shares outstanding are closely held, with insiders owning 64% of the company. We provide investors with a rather unique opportunity with the FDA's constructive guidance and our belief that the clinical data to this point is highly encouraging. We look forward to further development of tecarfarin. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kwong, for running through that. If you want to stop sharing the deck, there we go. We can. I think we've got time for a couple of questions there. Let's sort of start off. You talked a little bit on this, but what is being used in the past for folks in this specific indication of ESRD plus AFib?
Warfarin, which originally was rat poison, was the mainstay for oral anticoagulations for 60 years until the newer agents, also known as the NOACs, the Eliquis, Xarelto, Pradaxa, came on the market around 2010. For this patient population, it was mostly warfarin. But several years ago, researchers and others looked back at over 27,000 patients. And the takeaway was that warfarin did not reduce the risk of stroke or death, but that the increase in bleeding was much higher. So like in the slide that I showed the audience earlier, patients are not being anticoagulated at all. So they're getting treated for their ESRD by going to get dialysis, but the AFib complicates, and there has been no proven therapy.
And maybe just expanding on one of the key points you mentioned at the end there, expand for those that may not be familiar on what the orphan drug and maybe specifically the fast track designation, what that provides for tecarfarin.
Yeah, the Congress passed the Orphan Drug Act a few decades ago, and the Orphan Drug Act provided certain benefits for drug developers who are focusing on diseases that affect 200,000 patients or less in the United States. So 200,000 is the threshold, and we estimate about 150,000 patients in the U.S. who have ESRD, end-stage renal disease, and atrial fibrillation or AFib. And so with that, there are certain, some waiver of fees, but most importantly is the marketing exclusivity in the United States, no competition, 7 years from the date of product approval. It does not guarantee product approval, it just guarantees market exclusivity upon approval. The fast track designation is also designed to get important drugs to the market faster by getting the data to the agency faster. So instead of having to complete the complete trial, summarize everything and send a package through the new drug application or NDA, developers can now start to submit data, important data from their pivotal trial. It's like a rolling admission.
Perfect. And I think you touched on this, but just to confirm, would these patients be treated by the dialysis centers, or and if so, how exactly is the product expected to be administered?
Tecarfarin is a small molecule, once-a-day oral medication, similar to warfarin, with different doses. Nephrologists take care of dialysis patients or ESRD patients. Cardiologists, or more specifically electrophysiologists, are the ones who take care of patients who have AFib. So this will be a nephrologist, electrophysiologist care with the electrophysiologist writing the actual prescription for tecarfarin, an oral anticoagulant. But it'll be a joint care effort, since the patients will be under the care of nephrologists while undergoing dialysis treatment, 2 to 4 times a week.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for clarifying that. You mentioned a couple of drugs, sort of CV-related drugs that have been approved lately. What is sort of the general landscape of recent approvals, and maybe sort of dovetailing on that? I've seen some articles recently describing, I think, what is being termed as sort of general underinvestment in CV drugs vis-a-vis, the sort of the massive size of this market. What are some of the reasons that you might attribute that to?
Well, I think everybody knows that cardiovascular diseases remains the world's top killer. These articles also look back at all the investment that's been made over the last decade or two in the different therapeutics, and certainly oncology has gotten the most financial support in terms of drug development. And cardiovascular as a category has been stagnant as far as investment, as well as productivity, getting products through. But we've seen, as I've showed on the slides, several products by Bristol Myers Squibb and BioCardia, Camzyos, and as well as Vyndaqel, Vyndamax, FoldRx, Pfizer. Two very unique cardiovascular orphan indicated or designated drugs that were approved and are on the marketplace for rare cardiovascular diseases. So the marketplace recognizes the uniqueness of cardiovascular orphan diseases, but the agency also as well. We look at it as very positively for what we're trying to do, because the pivotal trials for both of those products are about similar to the one that we are contemplating to undertake.
Perfect. Sounds good. Well, I think we're sort of reaching the end of the time here. Quang, thank you very much for sort of that overview and for taking a few questions here. Greatly appreciate that. Again, I guess I just want to remind everyone before we wrap up here that if you would like to arrange a one-on-one meeting with Quang and Matt Zott there and have not already done so or put in your request, you can send me an email, Blum, BLUM, at lythampartners.com, or visit our website, lythampartners.com/virtual. Click on that one-on-one meeting request button, and we'll look to get you taken care of. So we hope everyone enjoys the conference. Quang, once again, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Robert.